Let's go ahead and get started for today. Welcome to our Whole Communities Membership Program kickoff. My name is Natasha Lance, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Outreach here at the Center for Nutrition Studies. And I'm going to start today by giving you an overview of today's events. First, I'm going to go through some housekeeping details and provide you with an overview of our membership program. Then you will hear from our today's speakers. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. And speaking of questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can use the chat to interact with other participants and moderators, but be sure to switch your chat setting from hosts and panelists to everyone. And remember to be kind and courteous to ensure that the chat remains friendly for all people, regardless of where they are on their plant-based journey. And I would like to give a huge thank you to our CNS staff members who are monitoring the chat and providing technical support for this event. They are going to drop the Whole Communities membership join link. And just so you know, all participants today will receive the replay link and a join link in an email later this afternoon. For those of you who might need closed captioning, please go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, click on closed captioning, and then click show subtitles. If you experience any technical issues during our session, I would suggest that you sign out of Zoom, sign back in, click your link, and come back into the session. That usually fixes everything. Okay, so that's enough for housekeeping. Today's event marks the kickoff of the Center for Nutrition Studies' new membership program. It's called Whole Communities. The vision of CNS's CEO, Dr. Colin Campbell, and her father, Colin Campbell. All membership dollars go to fund CNS's growing community grants program. Whole Communities is the embodiment of holism in practice. Whole Communities membership is a tangible way for all of us to put Dr. Campbell's groundbreaking nutrition research into practice. Whole Communities sits firmly at the crossroads of personal, communal, and ecological health, bringing together those of us who believe in the power of plant-based nutrition to build resilient communities of health through food. And at the heart of Whole Communities is our growing online community of people, just like you, who want to make a difference. You might be asking, what's this online community all about? Our online community is vibrant and active, and it's away from all the standard social networking platforms. Here in the online community, you can participate in in-depth discussions about critical issues that matter to you, experience the support of people who share similar beliefs and interests. You can join monthly face-to-face Zoom meetings to dig deeper into your special interests. And you also have access to monthly how-to workshops featuring our community grant recipients and the boots on the ground work that they're doing around the globe. Oh, and I should also mention that Whole Communities members receive a 15% discount on CNS's acclaimed plant-based nutrition certificate, and so much more. I want to give a heartfelt shout out to our dedicated team of tireless volunteers who are moderating our online community. Lindsay Collins, Matt Dempsey, Coral Syret, Robert Klein, Sherry Bant, and Barb Root. They're waiting to welcome you into our online community and answer any questions that you have. They're real people providing you with real support. Okay, well, that covers the basics of membership. Let's get into the program and introduce you to two people who I deeply admire and who are going to help us understand the urgency and importance of plant-based nutrition as the path forward toward a healthier future for all living beings and Mother Earth. Today, we have the honor of spending time with two living legends. Dr. T. Colin Campbell and Howard Lyman have more than 140 years, yes, that's 140 years of combined experience in the plant-based movement. Both men are New York Times best-selling authors. Dr. Campbell is a nutritional biochemist by training, and Howard is a farmer and activist. I've asked our moderators to drop our speakers' full bios in the chat for those of you who want to learn more about these two great men. Not only are they great at what they do, they are genuinely great people who have dedicated their lives to helping us and others like us. Let's hear from these two giants in the field. Are you ready, Dr. Campbell and Howard?
I am.
Go for it.
All right. That's what I want to hear. That's wonderful. So let's just dive in. So based on your cumulative experience with over 140 years, as I mentioned, it would be great if you could reflect on your life's work, specifically how we eat relates to chronic disease and how and what we grow impacts our personal health and the health of the planet. So in order to do this, because that's a lot to wrap our minds around, let's journey back to when you started your careers. So Howard, let's start with you. Tell us where and what you were doing 70 years ago. And then Dr. Campbell, you can share with us as well.
Well, 70 years ago, I was in high school, and it was the biggest waste of time I can imagine. You know, I wanted to be a farmer. My father owned a farm. Why in the world would I want to go to school? I mean, were they going to teach me a farm? No. So I went to school to party and play football. And I'll tell you, I was damn good at both of those. But as far as my educational career, never one time in the first 12 years of my school did I ever take a book home. I didn't need it. I was going to be a farmer. And so it was just, it was easier to go to school than it was to work on the farm. And so it was like a vacation. I never, ever thought I was going to be anything other than a farmer. And so 70 years ago, I'll tell you, I was partying and playing football and loving every day of it.
And how about you, Colin?
Yeah, well, I feel like I have a lot in common with Howard, a long time a good friend. I too was on a farm. My dad only had a couple years education, actually. He had been an immigrant from Northern Ireland. And so he, because of his lack of education, but he was very interested that I get an education. I was the oldest son. And so one thing he had me do, I went to the local school, which was only 3 rooms in a little town nearby. But when it was time for high school, he wanted me to go away to a school someplace else. He couldn't afford, the fancy schools that cost money. So I went to a public school in Washington, D.C. I had to drive 102 miles a day for 5 years to go to junior and senior high school. That's how committed he was. So he was very much a part of my life. My mom, of course, was taking care of the local garden and stuff like that. But my dad was always really into making sure I got some kind of education. And so from thereafter, I owe so much to so many because I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was suggested I maybe could be a doctor. I didn't particularly want to do that because they were on call for 24 hours a day. And I just didn't want that. But so I ended up at Penn State and then got early admission to in agriculture first and pre-veterinary science. And my advisor, unbeknownst to me, made arrangements for me to get early admission at the veterinary school in Georgia at the same time to get the same credit to finish my undergraduate. And I was there in the veterinary school for a year, and then I got a telegram from someone I didn't know, a fairly well-known professor at Cornell, who had offered me a scholarship in a telegram if I would just leave veterinary school to go to Cornell. So I checked with some of my seniors, and they all said I should do that. And turned out that was more in the area of nutrition, possibly medicine, getting into research, and that's where I was. And then the Army interluded for between that my PhD, but then I got another letter when I was supposed to be reporting to Fort Collins, Colorado, obviously. Just when Vietnam War was just beginning. And so I had a commitment to report there, through my OTC training, but I got this letter again, unsolicited, from another professor at Cornell, said, why don't you come back to Cornell? So I came back to Cornell, and then I went and did my doctorate. That was in the animal nutrition or animal science department. Both of them were. So it was all, for me, it was kind of being home in a way. I mean, farming was my deal, either being a veterinarian or in this case, studying things about biochemistry and stuff like that, and food, but closely linked to the farm. So I was, we'll get into this later, so I was involved in doing that kind of thing. And I just want to mention when I first met Howard, who was always an inspiration, because Howard, I remember yes, you did a farm. You ran a big outfit. You ran a really big farm, actually, much bigger than ours. And then I met Howard at an office in Washington because he was a lobbyist, I think, maybe the right word, for the farm industry. You could tell more about that. I'm not sure I'm getting that right, Howard, but he was in the farm business. He knew the farm. And that's where I was raised, and like you, Natasha, too.
Mhm.
We're all from the farm. And it's a style of life that I treasure. I still do. It's different now, unfortunately, but anyhow,
Well,
I ended up in science.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yes, you both do have a similar background with the farming, and it sounds, Colin, that you kept being brought back to Cornell in various ways. So Howard, you said that high school wasn't really up your alley. So what'd you do after high school?
Well, when I got out of high school, I then went and worked full time on the farm. And I found, the problem was I wasn't smart enough to run the farm. And I was dumber than a post. So rather than just beat my head against the wall at the farm, I decided that I'd go to college and I would learn how to farm. And I would also play a little more football. So I went to Montana State, ended up out there as a 300-pound football player. I got a degree in agriculture, and I ended up also in the Army and spent a couple of years in the Army, came home and took over the farm. And at the time, it was a small farm operation. And over a number of years, I turned it into an operation where I had 10,000 head of cattle, 10,000 acres of crop, and over 30 employees. And so I thought, man, I'm on top of the world. I'm the Donald Trump of agriculture. And the problem is that the bigger we got, the more money you had to borrow, and the more you were in debt. And I looked at it and I said, this game is rigged. Farming isn't to provide food for people. Farming is to provide money for bankers. And so I ended up selling my farm. And during this time, I had run for the Congress in the state of Montana, and lost by 4 percentage points. And I thought I was given an opportunity to go to Washington and work on Capitol Hill as a lobbyist. And I thought, wow, what a wonderful deal. You actually take a real farmer and talk to people that have the chance to make farming what it should be, as profitable. And so I went and I spent 5 years working on Capitol Hill. And I will tell you right now, the last thing in the world that people on Capitol Hill are interested in is doing anything good. It's all about taking care of self. And so at that time, I'd met T in my office, and I'll never forget, we were sitting there talking, and he said to me, he said, "Do you ever have anybody in your family have cancer?" I said, "Yeah, I had a brother that died of Hodgkin's disease." And T told me, he said, "You know, that can come from the chemicals you used on a farm." All of a sudden, you know, the light went off in my mind. And then I thought, maybe I ought to look into this a little. And so I read Silent Spring. And all of a sudden, things started fitting into place. But it was not about getting bigger. It was not about more chemicals. It was not about getting larger operation. It was about doing things in concert with nature. At this time, remember, I was a 300-pound football player. Well, at this time in Washington, I was well over 300 pounds. The only scale that I could find that would weigh myself was the one that sent out free brochures for the members of Congress, was down in the basement of the Capitol. So I went and stepped on the scale, and I thought, oh my God, I was well over 300 pounds. Every time I'd sit down and have lunch, my nose would bleed. I knew I was in trouble. And that's when I started looking into diet and health. And, you know, I'll tell the viewers today, the greatest thing that ever happened in the movement of associating diet with health was the China study. Every individual alive should be required to read the China study, because it's the first time that a large-scale study was done that brought all of it together, where people lived, what they did, what they ate, and how their health was. The first time in the world, and I will guarantee you right now, T knows just as well as I do that when you end up taking science and looking for the truth, and when you find it, it's not the revelation that everybody wants to jump on board. The fact is that the minute you leave the herd, the minute you think about things differently than the school solution, all of a sudden you are bastardized. And that's when the fight starts about educating people that they can actually be in charge of their own health with their fork.
Very well said, Howard. And I think that this just talks about both of you are really setting the stage in your career. And it sounds like you both took a trajectory that was certainly different than you ever thought when you first started off. And your paths crossed, and you read the China study, you're starting to think about your health, Howard. Well, how about you, Colin? What was happening in your career at that time that may have sent you toward your plant-based research?
Well, in my graduate work at the time, I did a dissertation on animal protein. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, we all had to have animal protein. That's why either subconsciously or consciously, people tend to eat animal foods to make sure they get that protein. I mean, that's as old as history almost, that whole idea. And so I did my doctoral dissertation on, in a sense, showing the value of animal protein working with cows and sheep. Here's how you can do it more efficiently, if you will. So that was consistent with my own personal background. I didn't have any reason to question that. But then after spending a couple of years at MIT and then taking my position at Virginia Tech, I was put in charge, or I was a coordinator for a program in the Philippines it was a State Department funded project to design a program that would be more efficient in feeding malnourished children. Malnourished children was a big deal, big problem in a lot of countries. And certainly in the Philippines, it was at the time. So I spent, it was about 10 years. We had a project, as I say, to do that. And I had a senior colleague who was first responsible for it. Another one of the people I owe everything to, Dr. Charlie Engel. But in any case, we were in the Philippines and supposed to be giving these kids more protein, animal protein. Well, it turned out, I don't know if I've said this publicly too many times, it turned out that the so-called Food for Peace program in the United States was actually gathering low-fat milk products, dried milk powder, they called it, and sending it abroad. And they were sending it abroad, I guess for money, obviously, but it was coming into the Philippines, and the trucks were going down to the pier, picking up this dried milk powder and taking it up to a big factory that had nothing to do with us. It was a big beer factory. San Miguel was the name of it. And I don't know what they were doing in the food business, but we were supposed to be using that kind of protein to feed the kids. But I saw something, I thought, thanks to a couple of my medical colleagues too, I saw something that looked like these children might have higher risk for liver cancer of all things. Liver cancer being more common in the Philippines than it is in the United States, but nonetheless, there it was. Most kids, they didn't know what, I mean, they were really poor. They weren't getting enough food, all that sort of thing. It was just, it left an imprint on my mind for the rest of my life to be working with those kids. But there were a few families who did get enough protein. Sure enough, it seemed like they were getting more liver cancer. Then there was a study in China, in India on experimental animals showing the same thing. More protein fed to rats who were getting a carcinogen to give liver cancer, more protein increased to cancer production. So I had a challenge. Do we use this protein, this animal protein I had so revered for feeding these kids? There was a question that I had to resolve in my mind. So I organized a study back at Virginia Tech with NIH funding, and that went on for 27 years. And I just first wanted to know, is this true? This crazy idea true? And sure enough, as we got into it, and I had a lot of students and so forth, and over the years, I came to learn, yes, it is. Animal protein is a potent promoter of cancer. Of course, you could say, oh, that was just liver cancer, that was just rats. But quite frankly, if you just started looking a little more broadly at other diseases, and humans, of course, you start looking at that, it's the same thing. And so that really got me caught up in the whole idea of questioning my own background. I had to begin to change. And so as I started to change, I got into a heap of trouble. And that's part of my story too. I can talk about that later, but I come to realize that there were some corporate interests out there. They didn't like what I was doing. And they found their ways to do whatever they could to either block it or take me down one way or another. But what to me was, it wasn't an idea of my turning away from it because I couldn't leave what I saw. And my dad had, he, as I said, he was important to my life, and he left me always, he said this several times, when you get big, he would say, when you get big, you go off and do your thing, he says, just remember one thing, tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And I was learning from science, that was the principle of science. You tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And there was no way I could walk away from seeing something that I may not have been familiar with. So I started doing the work, and then one thing led to another. It turned out to be true. So the rest of it is, that's what it was. And I really got me into the science. I loved science. It was a great challenge working with young people and learning things, and a lot of things I didn't know and that ran against the grain here in the corporate world.
So this whole idea of building whole communities where people are taking a stand, they're stepping out, they're speaking on behalf of whole food, plant-based nutrition, they're going against the culture within their communities and those kinds of things. The two of you, what I'm hearing you say is that you reached points in your career where you had to make some very big decisions that were quite difficult and that they were going against the grain for both of you. So Howard, you just talked about how your health, you were making these huge connections with some of the chemicals on the farm. The two of you met, you were doing kind of different work at that time, but coming at it from similar angles. So can you talk a little bit more about, and Colin, you just got into this a little, in that you really had to go against the current system and how difficult that was. Well, Howard, from reading your book, Mad Cowboy, and the follow-up book, you seem to have had an aha moment in your life that kind of brought this all together. And from that point forward, your beliefs and what you were telling the world was different than before. So can you tell a little bit more of your story, Howard? And then Colin, you can follow up further with yours.
Sure. I was in Washington, D.C., working as a lobbyist for farmers, agriculturists. And at the same time, I've come to the conclusion in my own mind that if I continue to eat the way I'm eating, I'm going to kill myself. And so, you know, being a representative of agriculture and embarking on a vegan diet are really not real compatible. So I became a closet vegan. And I wasn't going to tell anybody. I was just going to try it out. And if it didn't work, then nobody would know. So anyway, I became a closet vegetarian and then a vegan. And lo and behold, I lose over 100 pounds. I feel the best I've felt since I started playing football back in high school. And I could not continue down the path of representing agriculture on Capitol Hill and know in my own mind that what I was promoting was leading to a major part of the health problem in this country. So I resigned, and here I am in Washington, D.C., which is a fairly expensive place to live with no job. And I'm one of those tainted people because I'm a vegan. And not only am I a vegan, I'm a vegan with a big mouth. And, I don't have sense enough to take the paycheck and keep my mouth shut. So I end up running a international campaign for Jeremy Rifkin on a book that he wrote, which was called Beyond Beef. I organized the largest demonstration ever held in the world. We ended up doing an event of picketing in front of McDonald's restaurants around the world, and we had 1,380 teams around the world at different vegan or McDonald's restaurants. And so that's where I got started, and I started talking to people around the world about, what we're eating and what's on our diet and what's accepted is wrong. And my hometown newspaper, they put an article on the front page and they said, Lyman, he's a turncoat. And so there I was in the state of Montana, almost with a bounty on my head. But the fact of it is, when T talks about the fact that his father told him to tell the truth, I'm telling you, when I grew up, the word meant a lot. and you did not lie. And when you knew the truth, you could not sit down and let it go on and see people getting sicker and sicker because it was the accepted thing for the US agricultural corporations. So anyway, I started traveling around the world, and I don't know, for 5 years, I traveled about 100,000 miles a year. And that was back in the days nobody ever heard of Zoom. The largest event I ever spoke at was, there were about 25,000 people there. The smallest one was in Salt Lake City, and there were 2. I never turned down speaking because the audience wasn't large enough, because I figure if they cared enough to come, then I should care enough to tell them the truth. And I'll tell you today, things are much different than they were back then. And, today you walk in any truck stop and say to a waitress, I want a vegan meal, and they know exactly what you're talking about. Back then, when I started, if you told somebody you wanted a vegan meal, they thought you had a communicable disease. So we've come a long way.
Absolutely. So what you're telling our audience is that you went from owning the largest cattle operation to becoming vegan, to taking that message around the world because truth matters. And once you knew the truth, you could not hold back. Well, Colin, it sounds like you were on a similar path with the work that you were doing. You had discovered something in your research that you just couldn't turn a blind eye to and needed, as a scientist and researcher, to dig into deeper. So tell us what happened once you started understanding and learning this.
Yeah, well, I might just ask Howard a question here.
Sure.
Very interesting. Howard, I remember, by the way, what he said, and I could say more, he was the voice. He was a really very powerful voice around those days, especially with his background, being a person like that. But then, Howard, you ended up in going to London and learned something about this mad cow disease, whatever that was. And then you came home and talked to Oprah Winfrey. And you had the audacity to say to her something that caused her to say, you could tell obviously better than I can, I'll never eat another beef. And that led to a big lawsuit. I was asked to testify in London when those 2 young folks, went after McDonald's at that time. I don't know whether they knew that or not, but in some ways we kind of crossed paths, didn't talk about it much. But you went on Oprah Winfrey's show and said what you said, which she ended up getting sued for. The 2 of you did. Can you tell that story?
Well, I was in Washington. I was in London when around the mad cow time, and I was given a call by Oprah Winfrey and asked me if I would come and appear on her show and talk about mad cow disease. Well, I asked her, I said, how many people watch your show? She said, well, we're not sure, but it's in the millions. Well, that was a hard thing to get on the opportunity to talk to a few million people. So I agreed to go. And when I was on the show, I told Oprah about the fact that we were grinding up cows, dogs, pigs, chickens, grinding them up for food and feeding them back to our livestock. She looked at me and she said, that stops me cold. I will never again eat a burger. And for that, the cattle industry sued us, Oprah, Harpo Production, and myself. And they sued us for $150 million. Well, didn't bother me. I didn't have $150 million. I had a 1994 Ford Taurus with 250,000 miles on it. If they wanted to take it in that, but Oprah, she had, a few $1,000,000. And so we went to Amarillo, Texas, and we ended up with a 6-week trial. And, to be in the middle of cattle country and being sued for besmirching agriculture is not the easiest thing in the world. And so when we defended the case, we defended it with the right of free speech. Why in the world should anybody like the jury be sued for saying what they believe to be true? So anyway, we won the trial. So they sued us 3 more times. We were sued 4 times. We won 4 times. And it all came down to the fact, if they'd have kept their mouth shut and let it go, probably the majority of the world would have never heard of what went on in the Oprah trial. And at the end of it, everybody knew. And so, you've got to remember, and you do a lot of crowing, you may end up drawing the bear that's going to come to eat you. So that's what happened in that trial.
Thank you for sharing your story. And Colin, how about you? You both are doing amazing work. You're learning in your research new and exciting things, and you need to tell the world. So you talked a little bit about corporate interests that certainly didn't want to hear what you had to say. Do you want to speak a bit more on that?
Yeah, I was on a National Academy Committee in 1980-82. At the time was a Senator McGovern in 1977 had come out with a report at the time, and that was right after he had run for president. George McGovern came out with a report that suggested, after 2 years of one year of study, that meat was a problem, maybe for heart disease. It was a fairly modest report. Well, he really caught it too, and he got a lot of scolding for that. He had to go back and then redo that report the next year, revise it a little bit, because the first year they said don't eat red meat. So they said no eat meat. So they did revise it the second time in 1977 to say that don't eat red meat, but chicken and fish and so forth like that might be okay. So he got off the hook a little bit, but after that, then the U.S. Senate, curious about this claim of McGovern, they put up money to set up a new committee for the National Academy of Science to run on the cancer question. And so I was called in on that and, given some advice, in fact, to the director of the National Cancer Institute when he testified, on that question. Then I was on the committee. On that committee, there were really good folks on there, the 13 of us. And we started looking at it scientifically, and sure enough, what McGovern had said, or his committee had said, seemed to apply to cancer as well. And that was the most sought after report in the history of the National Academy, actually. I was the one who gave testimony before congressional committees, and I became fairly visible. That People magazine had me featured, all this and that, because I was raising questions about, from the scientific point of view, that protein is not what we think it is. It's just not not only does it increase blood cholesterol and heart disease risk and so forth and so on, my lab, as I mentioned before, we were showing that it increases cancer too, for crying out loud. And you can know that didn't set well. Then that in turn, because of my visibility, there were people circulating stuff that I had too much influence in Washington and so forth and so on, that I should be brought down. So they kind of got busy, and it's a long story. I tell it in the China study to some extent. I was on another committee to supposedly to tell the truth to the American public, what is nutrition information and so forth and so on. I was assigned to that committee because I was the representative to Congress. So I was ad hoc on that committee at the time. I discovered that committee, I knew those folks quite well, but that committee was singing a song of industry. I objected. I didn't have a vote because I was ad hoc. I was just being appointed because of my association with, with the Congress at the time. And so I objected, and that almost led to a physical confrontation on the part of the chair. He came around and jerked my chair and said, "What's wrong with you?" So forth and so on. Well, it turned out my actions at the time caused a bit of annoyance, to say the least. That committee then was disbanded, and I was named the chair. Fortunately, the press, and given the responsibility of trying to set it right. So we worked on it a bit, and I finally convinced the committee members that I didn't like the idea of being so autocratic like that. It sounded very McCarthyist to me, so we abandoned ship. But that affair for me caused a lot of problems, because the industry really then came after me, and they operated through our professional society. I had been just nominated to be the president of society, but then there was a petition came up to have me thrown out of the society. So I had to go to Washington to go to a hearing to be expelled from the society, which was the only society. I had to, attend to that. And then, there were a bunch of other stuff too that just came down the pike, one after another, that somehow I was shooting off my mouth a little bit too much, and, and getting on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. And so, of course it was bothersome at the time, and I wasn't that old, and so forth and so on, but I couldn't leave what I had said before, from my father, for one thing. And so I decided to use those experiences, there are many more. I use those experiences as a lesson. To me, it was a lesson. I was learning, by their foolishness, I was learning a little bit of something about what the system was all about. And of course, at that time, Howard comes along, and that's one of the things that I really enjoyed my relationship with him, because there he was sitting he has a lobbyist in Congress doing his thing, and here he is, turning his attention to the truth, as he already said. I mean, what more can you ask for? And so it was kind of fun, and it went on for me for, I don't know, it went on forever, through the 80s, and finally in the 1980, when our 1990, our China study came out, the whole thing broke loose again, and it was featured in the New York Times, etc. It got quite a lot of news, and I was complaining. My wife finally said to me, "Why don't you stop your complaining and go write a book, talk to the public?" So she kept at me for about 10 years, and I finally did sit down with her youngest son and wrote the China study. So that's part of the story. I mean, a lot of this, my stuff that went on, we kept on doing research and learning more about. I found it fascinating, different way of looking at food, obviously, than what I had been accustomed to, but it was so real. It was so real. And of course, I was, complaining, as I said, about all this nonsense, the crap I was putting up with. And so I finally ended up writing the China study. I said, I want to, I want to, well, like my wife said, the people, the children, the women and children in the world especially, they've got to know, this is not being told. So that was my motivation, I should say, to try to tell this, and not in all the highfalutin, scientific technical terms. I had to use some of that, obviously, but to try to tell it in a way in which people might be able to understand it. That was really the genesis of the China study. So
And
it did come out of, a lot of it came out of not just the research that we were doing, and your colleagues, obviously, a lot of wonderful colleagues are working with, also coming up with things that I interpreted, on my side of the fence, if you will. And it became a very exciting adventure. Obviously, something different.
You both talk about kind of this, as you just said it, Colin, as an exciting adventure. You both learned something that you didn't know was there. You took that message on the road, and it came from a place of responsibility. Once you knew this information, the only thing that either of you could do with it was to educate people. And so you have spent your lives educating, inspiring, and hoping to get the message out about the importance of whole food, plant-based nutrition. And we've never been right now at a more critical point. And, I think we don't have so much time to lose. We have astronomically high medical bills due to diet-related diseases. People are sicker than ever. Medical bills are the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country, and we're nowhere near the healthiest nation in terms of health outcomes. So in addition, we have a current industrial food system that you've mentioned, Howard, that's destroying the environment. So with these kind of insurmountable in many people's minds, how can we turn this around? In the experience that you both have had over many, many years, you've seen the movement change and grow. And when I say the movement, that's whole food, plant-based nutrition. What can you say to our audience? How can we turn this around? What steps can we take? So I don't know, Howard, if you would like to start that.
Well, it's a lot simpler than what you think.
Okay.
The first thing we need to understand is that there is a crisis worldwide, and it's around the weather patterns. We're ending up going towards a place where the planet is not going to be livable for the number of people that we have that are living here. Right now, we have a crisis, and there is an end point, and it's not that long off. Now, you look at it and you say, well, gee, we look at it, I'm concerned, I'd like a livable planet, but I can't get Congress to pass laws, and I can't afford to build solar panels, and I can't afford to buy an electric car. Well, half of all of the gases that are going into the atmosphere are coming from the production of livestock. If you want to do something meaningful about the future of living on planet Earth, all you have to do is change your diet, and you will have made a phenomenal impact on what will happen. And so I say to people today, you don't have to solve all of the problems. What you have to do is solve your share of them. And when we look at the future, if you want the facts, read the China study. You'll have more factual information than has ever been developed in the world on the subject of human nutrition. Once you have the facts, if you want to do something about it, realize by changing your diet, you will impact the greatest cause of global greenhouse gases on the planet Earth today. So you don't have to do everything, just do what you can do. And a side benefit is you're going to live a lot longer to enjoy planet Earth if you do it than if you don't. So it's easy to do something, and the time is now.
So what you just said so beautifully is that nutrition is at the heart of not only personal health, but that ecological health as well. And so by doing the act of eating whole food, plant-based food, that you are twofold. You're helping your personal health, you're also helping the well-being of your community and the planet. So how about you, Colin? What do you think? How can we turn this around? What are some practical things people can do?
Well, the first thing I would say is simply to support what Howard said. A lot of us, we do like to be healthy, most of us, and we like to have a long life and enjoy our children, grandchildren, etc. This is the way to do it. This is the way to eat to extend life. There's no question about that. So, focusing on ourselves, our family, our friends, to really go down this path is well worthwhile. I would add, however, based on some things that I learned along the way too, and being involved, some things that should happen at the senior level, at the sort of governmental level, if you will, that's really important, our societal level, because as we can do things as individuals and achieve a lot that way, but we do have an umbrella. We do have an umbrella that is stopping us from really understanding fully, most people from understanding this idea. Here's the umbrella. The medical system is such that they're not taught nutrition, number one. And by the way, from a sort of scientific philosophical point of view, the medical system survives on looking at the parts, one thing at a time, treated by parts like a drug. That's the parts. Nutrition is the whole. That's Mother Nature working. We eat the right kind of food. She knows what to do with the food that we provide. All we need to do is provide the right kind of food. It's enormously complex. And so we get in a hole, we go in a rut when we start picking up one part at a time, as if it means the whole. I mean, I have to say this, that's in part the basis for the entire drug industry. We eat the wrong food, and we start to have problems, and we pretend we're going to survive and control those problems by the use of this one part kind of thing. I mean, Aristotle said this here over 2,000 years ago. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's very simple, very simple. Coming back to present day system though, I think medical schools must have their physicians receive respectable training in nutrition, number one. Number two, the system is now built that reimbursement for professional services, compensation for professional people is based a lot, to a great extent, on medical specialties, of which there are something, last I counted, 134 different specialties. A doctor meets a patient, then they mark down whatever it is, they were talking about, and they get reimbursed for that. But there's 130 or so medical specialties. There's not one called nutrition. Not one called nutrition. So, the mechanism is not there. Really fundamental information is not fully there for them to get adequate compensation. That's fairly easily fixed, by the way. So, you got education, and you got reimbursement for the primary caretakers. Dietitians and nutritionists, wonderful people. Those people, are out there doing their thing, very excited. I mean, I've always spoken to them a lot. They're very excited people. Most of them used to be women, but now there's a mixture. And so they unfortunately are living within a system that controls their licensing and so forth, who brag about their association with GlaxoSmithKline, with M&M Bars, with the industry. So they also need to be released and offered the right kind of nutrition or education. And then finally, the question concerning the research that we do in the country. Most of the research funding in our United States comes from the National Institutes of Health, and there's about 27 institutes. And one of them funded all my research, most of it, that's the Cancer Institute. But there's 26 others. Do you know that there's one for heart disease, one for cancer, one for this, one for that? Not one for nutrition. So here we have a system, and I don't want to pick on individuals, and I don't think you like doing that. I'm just talking about the system of which we are all a part. And we need to the extent we can, at least understand this umbrella, I call it the umbrella, is kind of keeping us under control. And Howard, you spoke to this just a moment ago in a way, and that is that it's really about free speech. I've become, through the years, I've become really quite interested in that idea, to say the least, of, it's the First Amendment of our Constitution, for crying out loud. And when we get in situations where we may be speaking things that are not terribly comfortable for everyone, first off, we have to tell the truth. There's no question about that. But then we should be allowed and encouraged to tell the truth. We should not be suppressed. and also at the same time, we have a right to choose for ourselves what we do here as far as the health is concerned. But we also, unfortunately, the entire population needs to be aware of this information. But unfortunately, we got this layer of control, I have to say. And it's just evolved over time. And we're all part of it. But we got to be conscious of it. And then start talking about it. It works. And so, Howard saw it personally, and he represented the industry that he ended up questioning too. And so, it just comes out that way. That we got a big job to do in the climate. Obviously, the climate it's the new bomb about to break. And so we've already seen evidence of what it's all about. And we've just got to do something about it. Eat the right food.
Eat the right food. It comes back to that whole food, plant-based nutrition. And you both have just provided us with a lot of things practical things that we can do and what needs to change in the system. And our whole communities membership program, as I mentioned earlier, is the whole idea of that holism in practice, Colin, that you keep talking about. And it's really looking at nutrition holistically, and then looking at that intersection of personal, communal, and ecological health. I'm going to wrap up here because we'd love to take some questions from our audience, and we're getting short on time. But for our last question, Colin, we're trying to do all of this through whole communities, bringing together people who are taking action in their communities. But it's not just about learning what they can do and what should be done, but also by networking, sharing resources, building activities. You participated in our Plant Forward workshop series last year, which is now 6 workshops that we've built right into our online community, so everyone who's a whole communities member can access. But please tell us about your experiences with that event that we had, and why you think this type of platform and whole communities is critical to put into practice what we've been talking about today.
Yes, I was very excited to be part of that, Natasha. That was Leanne's idea initially when she came on board to talk about this. And was called outreach in her background, an educational, essentially outreach curriculum session was a perfect kind of background. But in any event, what did we have? 6 sessions, I think it was, more or less 4 speakers every session. And you drew on people who had received some micro grants for the most part, that's part of the program too, in different parts of the world, from Kenya to Peru to what have you. I mean, around the country. What was fascinating about that whole thing was that, we all are family here on the earth, I think, wherever we live and whatever ethnic group we belong to. It turns out we all, survive on the same kind of nutrition best. And so different people have different ideas, different experiences of how to pursue, this mission, from working let's say in the shops maybe, or farmers markets, growing the food, sustainable food production, and trying these really interesting ideas. And I just found that the people that you and Leanne and others brought on board to talk about their experiences, it holds your attention, kind of literally holds your attention. That what are they doing? And it's kind of new for, I say, for a lot of folks, that there are so many ways. And I would call it under the label outreach, and that's what we need to do. I think we've done a good job for an educational online program for sure. That's been nice, it's been needed. But at some point in time, education is one thing. The second thing is we got to learn how to apply it. And that's where we can reach out to all of our fellow citizens and who are doing the various and sundry things. And everybody's, there's a number of ideas that people can think about how to advance this cause are unlimited. And the talents that are available, among people to do this. I think one young gentleman was funded from Samoa in the Pacific. A very, very impressive gentleman there. And Kimball, I think David Kimball and the environment.
Yes.
Gosh, it was very exciting just to hear these different points of view. And I think that's what we're planning. I think that what you're into now is taking that model, expanding it. We can reach the whole world with this very powerful message. I don't know, it's just exciting. It is.
Well, thank you. And that's what we're doing with whole communities is
Right.
membership dollars that are raised to go into the community grants program that help fund initiatives around the world. And then those grant recipients share what they have to offer and they teach people how to do what they're doing. And so collectively, people can draw on each other's strengths and learn from the successes and challenges. So you have summed that up very nicely. Before we head into Q&A, I would love to give both of you the opportunity to say any parting words that you would like our audience to hear or any points that you wanted to refine.
Well, the only thing that I'd like to share is that I'm grateful for the number of recipients that are tuned in today. Can you imagine? There is no way in the world that they can put a stopper on the information with this many people that are involved and this many people doing what's right will make a difference. It's a thrill for me to see what's happening in this movement.
Thank you, Howard. Colin, anything you'd like to add?
I speak to Howard and say, Howard, it's an extension of what you were doing yourself. Going around and telling all kinds of people about your own thoughts and your messages and so forth. So in the process, I would add something I guess I already mentioned it, Howard did too. And it's really, to me, it's very personal. It's the idea of free speech. I think we really need to return to that wonderful thought that occurred, at least here in this country many years ago. We all need to feel free. We have a right to feel to speak our minds responsibly, of course, and with caring. That goes along with the package. But I think that just reaching out and expressing our thoughts and then being willing to be wrong. That's another part of the speaker. On the part of the speaker, it seems to me the speaker should be allowed to say, but the speaker also has to be willing to be wrong and change if better information comes along. That's the whole concept, in my view, of an idea that's good for the whole society, free speech.
Mm-hmm.
So I just can't say enough about that.
Thank you to both of you. There are a few questions here, and the first one comes from Anna Maria. And she says, stores are advertising antibiotic-free beef. Is this possible? Just curious from your research and your experience, either of you, are you able to speak to that at all?
Well, I can say one thing, it's possible. Is it likely? No. When you end up with knowing what I know about the way the animals are slaughtered and how they are congregated, to speak with great assuredness that your beef is, free and healthy. I have a hard time believing that. I would say the best thing to do is don't eat any of it, and you're on the right path.
Just simplify the whole process. Okay. So here's one from Janice Miller. Tufts has a great medical school and a seemingly strong advanced degree in nutrition science. My son went to medical school there, and I don't believe there was any overlap in the two departments. Why would they not want to meld the two? Dr. Campbell, do you maybe want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I've actually spoken at Tufts University twice at the medical center. In fact, I was very, very close to the formation of that that whole program in the very beginning. I was on a small committee that kind of walked around the beams when the place was being built, kind of overseeing some of it. So I felt close to Tufts in many ways over the years. But you know, we're all subject. I can't speak specifically to the TOUGH program at the moment. I know there's a group there that are quite interested, and you know, in the nutritional message. But here's the issue, and this is for all of us, wherever we are. Medicine is an idea, is a means of practicing health through using parts. You know, assuming certain nutrients are parts of this, that, or something else, and then taking parts, again, drugs to treat that, right? That is the practice. Nutrition, I have to argue, you know, I saw this at the cellular level. Nutrients working together in a marvelous way, infinitely complex. Mother Nature just knew what to do with it. And so it's very different. It's not just a discipline of working with each part alone and trying to make some money on it. It's basically just eating the whole food and let nature take command. On the other hand, is the medicine is like working with the parts. That makes a lot of money, but it doesn't make health. So at Tufts, even though I haven't been there recently, but there's some wonderful people there. It was a spinoff group from Harvard some years ago, quite frankly, that started the whole thing, but not quite sure what the questioner is asking in this particular case.
I think it's more, you know, how come departments don't really work together? You might have a medical school and you might have a nutrition school, but they don't necessarily have any overlapping classes or any work together.
Yeah, that's what I was assuming, Natasha. That's correct. That, you know, and she's quite right. That's why I like to go back to sort of the philosophical or scientific argument. You know, what's different about these two disciplines? They are different. They're hugely different. You can't make money in the area of nutrition very well, because that's the whole. All you can do is tell people what to do. Whereas on the other side, when you're working with the parts, there's lots of opportunities, especially when you can rely on intellectual property protection. You put those two ideas together, then you have an opportunity to sell stuff, ideas, products, whatever. So we have two different worlds here. And, you know, I can't make much of an argument for the parts side of the equation, but nonetheless, that's what I did. I worked with sort of the parts. I was actually in pharmacology at the early part of my career. And so I learned well that I thought, you know, the parts, you find out exactly what works where and you treat it and so forth and so on. But what I also learned at the same time, those parts, when you start thinking about it, thinking about how they're integrated, you discover nature. And we don't need to say anymore. Nature is a marvelous concept of just taking complexity. It's good to know the complexity. It helps to understand. But it's a nice idea to realize that nature has kind of pulled all that together. And that's the beauty of not only nutrition, but specifically of eating plants. We don't need animals.
Very well said. So one thing that often comes up quite a bit, and there are a couple of questions here, and that really has to do with food supplements. You know, freeze-dried, air-dried fruits and vegetables, powders, pills, supplements. You know, okay, well, if you're on a whole food plant-based way of eating, then, you know, you're going to obviously have to get something from a supplement. So can you speak a little bit, you have already, Colin, about kind of that concept of holism, but for those who really don't understand that concept, could you speak to this? Because this comes up a lot.
Yeah, sure. I was actually quite central to that too, when in the 1980s, our report, the National Academy of Science report that I was an author of, at that time, there was a group of entrepreneurs wanted to take our information in regards to single nutrients and then create an industry with part of the vitamin supplement industry. That's where it started. But they started making claims about what we said that wasn't true. So the National Academy of Science, who was running our committee at the time, they sued the industry in the Federal Trade Commission. That's the court, you know, the government court essentially. And they asked me to be the principal witness. So I had a chance to sit in the chair for 3 years in the docket, trying to assess these claims being made. Well, here's one thought that really came to my mind at that time. I think has been well tested now. if we take, this was on beta carotene, which is plant-derived substance, as you know, is provitamin A. It was found that smokers who consume more consume more beta carotene. As they consume more beta carotene, even though they're smoking for 30 years, the risk of lung cancer goes down. It's a very powerful effect. So this was very exciting. Beta carotene, wow. Maybe we give beta carotene to smokers, and help them to not get lung cancer. So that trial was done. That was done. Very carefully done, 29,000 smokers. What they did is that the smokers who consumed beta carotene, okay, they actually got less lung cancer. It was significant. They had to stop the study early. Was going to do for 8 years. They ran only for 5 years. And they got statistically significant results that show that smokers who were consuming more beta carotene, that meant more plants, the risk of lung cancer went down, was statistically significant. In contrast, the group who were taking beta carotene in the pill, it was exactly the opposite. The more beta carotene, lung cancer went up. And that was significant too. So here you have a situation, beautiful, that's been demonstrated many times since. If you take a nutrient in the plant and let, as I say, nature work with it the way she would like, right? That's one point of view, and that's where you get the health. If you take it out and you stick it in a pill, all bets are off. All bets are off. Maybe sometimes in the short run it looks like we can see something, but the supplement industry has survived on a myth for the most part. I'm not going to say that, I like to rely on the demonstration of evidence before I, make too strong of a statement, but there's occasionally when you might see something that looks a little bit good in the short run, but it's no substitute for eating food. So I'm not really a fan of the supplement industry.
Okay, thank you. For our last question today, and I think you can both speak to this, and Howard will give you the first crack at it. This is from Carol Rivera Cron. And as we go forward promoting whole food plant-based eating, how do we prevent corporate interests from taking over our efforts as they're doing with creating and promoting unhealthy processed foods? How do we keep whole food plant-based eating from being hijacked by industry interests? And you both have probably run up against these interests in your work.
There's probably nowhere that we could be 100% divorcing ourselves from corporate interests. The thing to look at is, rather than spending time condemning what they're doing, spend our time spreading the gospel about whole-based plant food. And the best way to start is at your own table. And the more you feed people good, whole food, the better that is. My wife is probably one of the greatest vegan cooks in the world. And I can't tell you the last time somebody has come to the table and said, oh, by the way, is this vegan? Good food prepared the correct way. That's where we want to spend our time and effort, and throwing rocks at somebody else just detracts from what our mission really needs to be.
Thank you, Howard. And Colin, how about you? Any additional thoughts on that? How to keep corporate interests out of whole food plant-based nutrition?
Well, I think Howard's comment that, let's focus on the positive rather than the negative if we can going forward. I would add a little asterisk for that to some extent, because I see and have seen, why the public tend not to know, something they deserve to know. And the public has paid a lot of money in a lot of cases for this information, and they're not learning about it. So we need to tell that information. It is black, it is negative, but there's no other way. I don't know way around it. We can, because they have the power to counter what we might say. And then I can't help but speak out when I get that pushback. So I do have to, unfortunately, I participate in the darkness, to some extent of pointing out the darkness. But Howard is absolutely right. I mean, when we get to the point where we can really talk about, what this does, how it affects us, that's the best medicine of all. It creates for us a nice life, and for the most part, reasonably free of disability when we get older, as much as that's possible. And yeah.
So it sounds like from what both of you are saying is it's focus on the positive, speak out and speak your mind when you know the truth, and do it at every turn. And so really, that's what Whole Communities, our new membership program, is all about. It's bringing together collective positivity and knowledge and understanding in a place where people can get the support they need to continue speaking out in their own households, in their communities, and around the world to create change based on whole food, plant-based nutrition. So I would love to thank you sincerely for your time, your wisdom, and for being here today and for being part of our Whole Communities kickoff. And I sure hope that you'll join us as guests down the road to come back and meet even more of our Whole Communities members as we go. So thank you for your time. And everyone else on the call today, thank you so much for being here to support the launch of this incredible new program. We only have up to go from here. Thank you for your time, everyone, and have a beautiful afternoon. Take care.